Hi there, I'm Leoya Lewis, and welcome to another edition of New Day, New Beginnings. Now, remember last week we talked about a friend or a foe. That was our title for last week. Is this person my friend or is he my foe? We talked about it and we talked about how do you know the difference, and we actually gave the actual dictionary uh, uh, meaning of each word. And of course, we said what a true friend was, and they were the ones that have your back, and they'll be with you no matter what. They're always supportive of you. They're genuine. True friends are hard to find, and we know that. We learned that last week. True friends, they're your companions, the one you enjoy with, the ones who support everything you want to do, and so forth and so on. But today, our title is Friend Turned Foe. So today, I want to talk about an actual true friend back in the biblical times, but who turned into a true foe. And I'm talking about two kings. I'm talking about King Saul, who was the current ruler, and David, who would follow after King Saul had died. Now, King Saul had been a king for a long time, but their biggest problem was the Philistines because they couldn't win. Nobody was winning against the Philistines. Why? Because if you remember, they had Goliath. And in having Goliath, he could fight any army all by himself. And that's what he did. They just cheered him on and cheered him on, and he one handedly would slew a whole army. And King Saul knew this, and the Philistines were gaining more and more land, more and more people were becoming their slaves, and they were getting really scared, period. That's all I can say. Saul was scared, his men were scared. Nobody wanted to fight the Philistines because they were just going to send out Goliath. So Saul didn't know what to do. And meanwhile, David, at the same time, they were being scared. David was off doing the sheep. He was watching the sheep, and his job was to watch the sheep. And his other job was his father would give him food for him to take to his brothers because they were in the army. I forgot to turn the arrow on. Because they were in the army and they needed food to keep them going. So his job was you just go there and take the food and come on back. Go back to the sheep. That was all he was supposed to do. But while he was supposed to be doing that, every day he would take them their food, but all the time he would hear Goliath down there hollering, "Ah, you cowards, you cowards. Won't any of you come down here and fight me? All of you scared? Come on, all of you come at one time. I don't care." Because Goliath was humongous. He was a giant and he could slew them all at one time. He did it before to others. So they knew they couldn't win. They didn't have enough men, plus they didn't have the strength they knew Goliath had. And David, when he heard Goliath, he said, well, he couldn't understand. He just didn't know. Why is everybody so afraid? Why don't you go fight? Why aren't you down there? And he said, if we're people of God, why are we so afraid of the Philistines? So they kept saying, you don't understand. You don't just go back to the sheep. Go back to the sheep. And he did, but every time he went back to the sheep, he was always praying. He was a very strong believer. He trusted God. He believed in God because he knew God had saved him before. So he trusted God. He never thought God would fail him. So he went off and he went to pray. And then the next day he would go back and hear Goliath down there again, hollering and hooping about telling them what a failure they are and they're all cowards and so forth and so on. And he said to them again, well, if we are followers of God, he'll protect us. And he just couldn't understand why they were losing their faith, is what it was. So one day, David had a gift that his father had told him to take to King Saul and give him this gift. And so again, he heard Goliath down there saying they were being threatened by them, that they were all cowards and so forth and so on. And David said to Saul, he said, well, I'll go fight him. And Saul was like, oh, no, you're way too young. You can't do that. And he then asked, well, why? Why can't I go? Just let me go. And then the king, he asked his whole army. He stood in front of his army and said, okay, who's going to go fight Goliath? And you know what? He got no volunteers, not one response from his own soldiers. And David went off again praying, as he did he prayed all day, every day. That was his lifestyle. And he prayed and prayed. He was praying now for God to give him strength so that he could fight Goliath. That was his prayer. Give me strength so that I may defeat Goliath. And he came back again the next day, and same thing over and over again. And he says, I will fight Goliath. I will fight him. And then he went on and told Saul about how he killed the bear and the lion when they were trying to get to the sheep. He killed them with nothing, his bare hands. Because what? Because God gave him the power to do it. And he told Saul about that. He told him about all his encounters with the wild animals. And he said, I will kill Goliath by the power of God. So he wasn't placing any power in himself. He had the faith in God. And even his brothers didn't believe that he could win. I mean, they now they're getting annoyed with him because they're thinking he's trying to show off. And what are you trying to do? Make us look bad? Make us look like fools? He's like, no, I'm not. I can beat him. With God's help, I can beat him. And they were acting like, I don't understand when he's just crazy. He can't win. He just can't win. But Saul then finally said, all right. Saul gave him permission. So he said, well, here, take my armor and take my sword. But David said, I can't use these because they're too heavy. Don't forget, he was only a young boy, not a kid, but in his teens. So he couldn't put on that heavy armor and carry that heavy sword. But he says, don't worry, God will protect me. And he prayed continually the next day, saying, you alone, Lord, are my salvation. You're my savior. You're my protector. And his brothers came to him again and said the same thing. They said, do you realize that Goliath is a natural born killer? That's what he was born to do. But you know what David said? He just said, I know. And his brother said, well, then why do you insist upon fighting him? And David said, well, maybe that's what I was born to do. Maybe I'm doing this to bring back faith to those who desperately need it, meaning his brothers, King Saul, and the whole army. He was doing it for God, he was doing it for them, for the country. And his brother said, well, does God want you to go out there and get yourself killed? And he said, no. He wants people whose hearts and minds are for him. So all he's saying is no, but as long as you're for him, he'll be for you. And faith is building, he was giving them examples because they said, they were like, faith? What is faith? How do I get faith? And and his brother said, and when I say his brother, I meant David. And David said, faith is building an ark where no one else believes. Who was that? Noah. They laughed at him when he built the ark. They said he was crazy. Who builds an ark on dry land? And he said, it's taken 300 men against 10,000. He was talking about Joshua, the Battle of Jericho. He only had 300 men against 10,000, but he still won. The wall came down and they took over Jericho. Or standing on the shore of the Red Sea and saying it will part. Well, who was that? Moses, when he held up the cane and he said, pray to God. And what happened? The Red Sea parted. So he's just saying faith in God is the unknown. Faith in God, you feel it, it's unknown, but yet you're knowing. It's like knowing with God, I can't fail. He said it's the impossible, but it is possible. And it's hopelessness, but yet having hope. Now, his brothers asked him, one of his brothers, well, how can I have faith in God? And David said to him, just come on out and face Goliath with me. Well, that didn't go over too big because his brother then said, I'll pass. I'll pass. He says, well, if I don't see you again, I'll see you on the other side. So he's saying he still doesn't have the faith required, not enough for him to go out there and face Goliath. He don't believe God will save him. So he walked away and he left David there alone. And he went on to pray. David went on praying. And in the morning, when David was supposed to go down and meet Goliath, that morning, his brother came to him one more time and asked him not to do it. Don't go through with this. He was so sure. He was assuring him that he would not win. And David's reply was, no, I can't win, but I know my God will deliver me. So he's telling him right there, no, it's not me that's doing it. It's God giving me the strength to defeat him. He says, don't worry, I'll be all right. I must believe that my God will be there for me. That's a strong kind of belief. Anyone can have faith knowing that God is in control. And he never deviated from that. He then recited the Lord's Prayer. He recited it to his brothers. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And he's a shepherd himself. And he went on to meet Goliath, praying all the way for strength to defeat him. Now, I want to go right fast to Psalm 18 because I just want to read a few verses here. Let's go to Psalm 18, and I'm going to just read verse 1 through 7 and talk about that for a minute because Psalm 118, this is saying David spoke unto the Lord the words of the song, and that the Lord delivered him from the hands of his enemies. And this was the words that he was saying: I will love thee, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer. My rock, my fortress, my deliverer. Oops, I dropped it. In him I will trust. He's my buckler, he's my horn of my salvation and my high tower. I will call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. The sorrows of death compassed me, surrounded me, and the floods of the ungodly men made me afraid. Yeah, he was afraid, but he trusted. He trusted in God. The sorrows of hell compass about me. The snares of death prevented me. In my distress, I called upon the Lord. I cried unto my God. He heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry came before him, even into his ears. And then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations also of the hills moved and were shaken because he was wroth. Wroth, meaning they were making God very angry. They were making God very angry, but David prayed the whole time. And all he said was, they, you know, no matter what, God would bring him forward. So what happened? David went on forward, and all he had was his rocks and his slingshot. Stones, I said rocks, stones and slingshot. And he slew him. He just wrung it around and whack. And it caught Goliath right in the forehead. Bam. And he was hailed a hero. He was hailed a hero by everybody. But yet all he kept saying was, it wasn't me, it was God. He praised the Lord and said he is faithful in all he does. God never lets you down. And just like he did that, so can we. He praised God every single day on a continuous basis. And Saul praised him for saving the kingdom. But once David was old enough, he did join Saul's army and he became a great fighter, warrior. He became a leader and a hero. So much so that he was more hailed than Saul himself. And this is where the friend turned to a foe because Saul began to resent the favor that David was getting from all the country. Now he wanted David dead. Even though he knew David and his own son Jonathan, they were like brothers. But Saul's hatred was overtaking all that he knew. That's all he could think about, getting rid of David. And Saul's daughter actually told David, she heard, them talking. And even when he was with Saul, telling him, I would never do anything to you. And when he turned to leave, Saul threw a spear, just missed him right on the wall, right beside him. And David knew that Saul was serious about really wanting him dead. And that's what made David leave. Once he realized how how intense Saul was on killing him, Saul thought he wanted his crown. He didn't want the crown. He already told him, "You're my king." But Saul hunted him down. He had soldiers hunting him for years. But David swore he would never put a hand on Saul because he was one of God's anointed, because he had been anointed by Samuel to become king. And David wasn't going to go against God. God anointed him, so be it. I'll always be under him. But Saul couldn't see it that way. But what happened was during a battle, Saul's son Jonathan was killed. And when Saul saw that, he just fell apart. In fact, he was so distraught by that, he ended up killing himself. Now, let me look at verse 17 of, where was I? On 18? Yeah, let me look at verse 17, because this is when David again, this is when David again was remembering how great his God really was. Because he was saying here, he delivered me from my strong enemy, Goliath, and all the Philistines, and from them which hated me, even Saul, for they were too strong for me. And he did so many wonderful battles for Saul. He won so many battles. But once Saul lost his son, he killed himself. He took his own life. And David did become king. But here, he's still saying so many people were hating on him. All the other battles that came after that, they prevented me in the day of my calamity, but the Lord was my stay. The Lord was my stay. He prevented them from stopping him. The Lord sustained, is what it meant, kept him. He brought me forth also into a large place. He delivered me because he delighted in me, because God saw how wonderful David was and how much David prayed to him and believed and trusted in him. The Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness, according to how I adhered to his laws and his ways. For I have kept the ways of the Lord and have not wickedly departed from my God, as did even Saul and all his army, because they did not believe. They did not believe in God anymore. They weren't even praying anymore. For all his judgments were before me, and I did not put away his statutes from me. And his statutes are his judgments. He never once deviated from that. I was also upright before him, and I kept myself from mine iniquity. So he did no evils, he did no wrongs. Therefore, the Lord hath recompensed me according to my righteousness. And to recompense means to compensate. He paid me back for not ever forgetting that he's in charge. And God, he can pay us back too. He can pay us back. And let me go down one more. When the merciful, thou wilt show thyself merciful. When you are merciful. With an upright man, thou wilt show thyself upright. With the pure, thou wilt show thyself pure. And with the froward, thou wilt show thyself froward. Froward are the evil ones. So evil begets evil. That's what he's saying. That's exactly what it's saying. And then in verse 30, he says, as for God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord is tried. He is a buckler to all those that trust him. And a buckler is a protector. And that's what he was doing, protecting. For who is God save the Lord, other than the Lord? Or who is a rock other than God? It is God that girdeth me with strength and maketh my way perfect. Girdeth me with strength and maketh my way perfect. And to girdeth means to provide equipment. And he gave him everything he needed. Which was it? A few rocks and a slingshot. But more than that, he gave him the strength to know how to use it. So in this lesson, we saw two things. We saw how quickly a true friend can turn a foe. It doesn't take much for people. Jealousy is one of the primary reasons for losing friendship. I mean, that's today as well. That just goes to show you how far back all this stuff goes. Nothing has changed except the people involved. This is back thousands of years ago, King Saul and David and so forth and so on. Well, the same things happened. Jealousy is what brought this on. Saul was so obsessed with the fact that David had won the affection of all the people, he thought that David wanted his crown. He didn't want his crown, but in his mind he did. And this turned his love for him into hate. And this happens today in our own lives. We have people we think are our friends and they're talking behind our back. David had that feeling. We talked about it last week, that uneasy feeling that you get when something doesn't feel right. When we talked about now's the time you need discernment. I mean, you got to keep your focus directed on what God is telling you to do. You got to pray daily and consistently. And I'm still working on that. I'm still working on the consistency part. I mean, I'm not as bad as those guys that I just throw my hands up and say there's no way. Because to me, there's always a way. And I'm learning more and more that God is the way. And just like David got that feeling, we spoke about that feeling last week. When something doesn't feel right, we said the discernment, God will show us the way. Will show us any wrong motives, will show us any hidden agendas. And Saul really had a hidden agenda. But you've got to keep your focus on what God has given you to do. And be aware of the people, aware of what's going on, any changes in your friends. So my closing words for today are, it's not about who's real to your face. It's about who's real behind your back. And until next week, I'm Lelia Lewis. Thanks for joining me.